An industrial powerhouse that transformed the American skyline.
There's a kind of futuristic look to this place, but it's all old, it's all rusted.
A holy relic that helped shape modern England.
It has all the hallmarks of a monastic complex, and for many today remains a mecca of Christian history in Britain.
A Gothic building in Poland that leaves few clues to its past.
These walls hide an incredibly dark history, one that is still shrouded in mystery to this day.
And ancient ruins in Israel, caught in the crossfire of a modern conflict.
You see this immense contrast between the ancient and the modern, but here, the ancient is deserted.
Decaying relics. Ruins of lost worlds. Sites haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. Near the quiet town of Bethlehem, USA, industrial remains punch out of the landscape.
There's a kind of futuristic look to this place, like something out of Blade Runner has been dropped out of the sky.
This isn't just one set of pipes or one set of chimneys. It's row upon row of decaying structures. It feels like it stretches on for a mile.
You enter one of these buildings, and inside is this bizarre spaghetti of chains suspending metal boxes from the ceiling. Like, what could this all be for? It's really strange.
When you came through the gate, it was like you were coming into another world, another town, another era.
A key development forged here paved the way for the construction of one of America's most iconic creations.
This was a revolution in structural engineering.
It is in many regards responsible for so much of New York City's skyline. It makes New York City in a way.
But this site wouldn't just build the nation. It would help save it. Bethlehem Steel, once a giant of American manufacturing that employed 30,000 men and women. Charlene Donchez-Mowers is a historian who is well aware of the hazards workers faced on a daily basis.
Everything was so dangerous, you couldn't wear a wedding ring. Anything could get caught. All your clothing had to be natural fibers because synthetic would melt if a spark hit it.
The strange overhanging objects offered security as well as safety.
These baskets that you see hanging from the ceiling have chains on them. The chain would come down and get attached to these pipe-like things, and they would put their own lock on it, and then no one could touch their things.
This steelworks had long been the lifeblood of the community.
So these were really the kind of, blue-collar workers of the USA, salt-of-the-earth type people.
A lot of the workers are European immigrants, especially Eastern European immigrants, and Latino workers. You also have Black workers, like my grandfather, who came from, in many cases, from the South. So they actually had a fairly diverse workforce. And that spilled over into steel towns where you would have people living side by side, going to school with each other, not always comfortably, but living side by side.
Dating back to 1857, the Bethlehem Steel Company was founded to help build America.
This place was started by people who wanted to make iron railroad tracks. This was when America still had a frontier, and the iron horses connected these disparate parts of the country.
With Bethlehem, it was its position geographically, being able to get ore, being able to get coal, made it just in the right place at the right time.
This is like baking a cake. You have to have the key ingredients, iron ore, coke, and limestone.
Situated in so-called Carbon County, they had everything they needed close by. And the infrastructure put in place to exploit these resources was of epic proportions.
This blast furnace is from the early 1900s. Right in front of us is an inclined plane, and there are two what are called skip cars. And a skip car is about the size of a van.
The cars took the raw materials up the tracks to be weighed and tipped into the furnace, which reached temperatures of over 1600 degrees C.
The ultimate goal is to create your iron as pure as possible, and then it's in its liquid form. You can literally open the gate of the furnace and this stuff pours out. But what's great about steel in its molten form is you can mold it.
Soon, their ambitions extended well beyond railroad tracks. In 1907, an invention made here radically transformed the American skyline.
The Bethlehem beam is also known as a wide flange beam, and it was enabled from a really important revolution in rolling steel.
The new rolling process produced H-shaped beams that were light, wide, and cheap.
So these big pieces of molten metal, red hot metal, would go between rollers that would shoot back and forth, and it would get thinner in the middle, and then the sides would get taller. And so you ended up with this incredible long piece of Bethlehem beam.
This was a revolution in structural engineering, and it could be used vertically as a column, allowing structures to be built taller than ever before.
We know what the US is famed for, it's skyscrapers. And it was exactly this engineering phenomenon that rocketed Bethlehem in terms of its supply to places like New York. Some of the buildings that they helped make included 40 Wall Street, the Manhattan Bank, and the Chrysler Building, to name a few.
In fact, in the 1920s, they provided steel for around 80% of the city's skyline, leading the company's chief engineer to claim that Bethlehem Steel owned New York. But they didn't stop there.
Not only skyscrapers, but it's these wonderful suspension bridges, something like the Golden Gate Bridge, which has this beautiful orange color. 83,000 tons of steel were used in the construction of this bridge.
Bethlehem, the major contractor, will build the steel towers and suspended span of the bridge. The sections are loaded aboard ships, and finally, through the Golden Gate into San Francisco Bay.
This was boom time for Bethlehem Steel, but it was nothing compared with what was to come.
In 1939, the president of Bethlehem Steel, Eugene Grace, was out golfing when a caddie ran up to him with a message. The story goes that Grace turned to his colleagues and said, "Gentlemen, we're about to make a lot of money."
When the Second World War broke out, orders began flooding in from Europe.
Everything from tanks to even big warships were being ordered by the British and the French. And at one stage, the machine shop number 2 was the biggest factory floor going in the whole world at the time.
I heard that they could produce one of those big ship guns a day. At one point, there were 800 men over 3 shifts a day. And this was a very dangerous, smoky, smelly place. There were machines up and down these aisles. You can see there were railroad tracks. There were overhead cranes.
Production was ramped up even further when the war came to America's shores.
Once Pearl Harbor is attacked, the United States starts to feel like it has stakes in this war. And so the threat became real.
I guess you can imagine that the ethos of the workplace will have dramatically shifted. You've gone from essentially creating arms to sell abroad to actually creating something to be part of saving your nation.
It was said that an American could be on a destroyer built at the Bethlehem Steel yard, firing guns built at Bethlehem Steel, shooting Bethlehem Steel shells whilst being protected by Bethlehem Steel armor plates.
Bethlehem Steel built over 1,100 ships during World War II. It was the largest shipbuilder in the world. And having these structures survive really gives a sense of scale of what big industry is like.
I don't want to say that it's responsible for the Allied victory, but it's critical to the Allied victory and to the United States' success in the war.
While Bethlehem Steel Corporation continues to operate elsewhere in the world, like many manufacturing plants in the so-called Rust Belt, its days in post-war America were numbered. Though unlike some, it was a slow, gradual decline that ended in the early 2000s. The children of workers that filled these factory floors have not forgotten the opportunities it has afforded them.
I think 13 members of my family worked at Bethlehem Steel. And then my generation, we were teachers and doctors and lawyers. But that gave our families the opportunity from being immigrant families in 1899, when my grandfather came here and got a job at Bethlehem Steel, to my generation. It's not just true for my family, but for many families throughout the United States.
Off the coast of northeast England is a ruin cloaked in mystery.
This road leads you out, seemingly to this vast expanse of sand and nothing else.
In the right weather, going down this road feels like you're driving into the North Sea, because sometimes the mists obscure the way forward.
But as the mist clears, it becomes apparent that this is a causeway that takes you to a tiny outcrop with a castle towering over its surroundings.
The castle appears to be organically growing out of the rock, and in its shadow are the remains of what looked like a cathedral-like structure.
It's right next to a church and surrounded by a cemetery with an intriguing mix of gravestones. So this place has a real spiritual feel to it.
The layout of the stone remains are telling and hint at Christian roots.
When you look at it from above, you can see that it's been constructed in the shape of a cross. It feels monastic in its design.
There are elaborate stone arches, one of them almost floating in the air. Ornate masonry, sculpture. This all points to a place of considerable opulence and wealth.
Yet it was the victim of an attack that shook this land to its core and sent shockwaves out across the Christian world. Dr. Francis McIntosh specializes in the archaeology of this region and is an expert on this celebrated ruin.
So we're here in the top end of the church, in the apse, which is the top of the cross.
The position of this new construction, completed around 1150, was all important and only exists because of an even older structure that lies at its feet.
They picked this spot for the church because we think this is where the 7th century church was. So this is a real kind of centre of Christianity, and it was the centre of the cult.
The high altar of that 7th century church held the body of the man behind this cult. And yet, this tomb contains neither a body nor a coffin.
And that is what we see now, a 12th century priory with a cenotaph, meaning an empty tomb.
So who was this cenotaph dedicated to? And why is the body no longer here? This rocky outcrop is the holy island of Lindisfarne, barely connected to the mainland by a causeway.
The tide rises so quickly here that on average, 1 car per month still gets stranded. But you can imagine how 1,000 years ago, this natural feature would have given the place a real mystical charm, created a real sense of wonder.
It was this sense of wonder, along with its isolation, that attracted the attention of King Oswald in the 7th century.
The era between the Romans leaving and the Norman conquest has really captured the imagination of people in recent years. I mean, you've got series such as The Vikings and The Last Kingdom. And in fact, King Oswald is said to have been the inspiration for the character Aragorn in Lord of the Rings.
Oswald's Northumberland covered a vast amount of land, making it the northern powerhouse of England, which at the time was made up of a small handful of warring Anglo-Saxon kingdoms.
He's going to let all of the other rulers on the Isle of Great Britain and on the continent of Europe know that he is a holy king and a wealthy king.
Oswald gifted Lindisfarne to monks to establish a monastery at the heart of his political kingdom.
And he was driven, like all rulers, by the desire to have monks praying for his soul and praying for the health and welfare of his lands. Christianity was a political act.
In the 670s, a monk named Cuthbert joined the monastery.
Cuthbert is himself a very holy man who likes a life of spiritual contemplation. He prefers to live as a hermit, and yet he's willing to act as a spiritual guide to kings.
News of Cuthbert's holiness spread, and in 685, the king appointed him bishop. So he was dragged back into the world of politics, the court, nobles, religion, but yet he still retained a reputation as a holy man, as a seer, as a healer, as a pastor.
But just a few years later, Cuthbert died. It's believed his body was placed in a stone coffin at the eastern end of the original building.
When his tomb was opened 11 years later, to everyone's astonishment, his body was found to be intact, uncorrupted. And it was a message to everyone that Cuthbert was truly divinely favored.
And that's when the cult really starts. People start coming to pray, to ask for miracles. We hear of a paralyzed boy who wore the shoes of Cuthbert, who was healed. A monk came here and fell seriously ill. He prayed by Cuthbert's grave and was miraculously cured. This is where the pilgrims would come to that high altar to see Cuthbert's grave.
As a result, powerful kings and rulers donated lands to it, making Lindisfarne one of the most important monastic sites in Britain.
And the ruins that extend off to the side of the original cross-shaped church reflect its increasing wealth.
All of these buildings were once filled with monks hard at work, tilling the land, receiving donations, writing out manuscripts, preserving knowledge, praying for the souls of their benefactors.
It was here, in this prestigious seat of knowledge and learning, that the Lindisfarne monks produced something extraordinary.
The Lindisfarne Gospels are one of the undoubted treasures of the world. It shows influences from the Celtic world, from the Anglo-Saxon world, and even the Mediterranean world, showing just how international a place Lindisfarne was. And not only are they one of the most beautiful Latin Bibles ever produced in England, but also a scribe has written translations of the Gospels in Old English underneath, making them one of the earliest sources of the Bible in Old English, long before the Reformation.
But the monastery's geographical position, once seen as a strength, would soon become its weakness.
You put this monastery on a holy island because it would protect them from armies coming from land. They didn't think for a moment that they had to worry about an army coming from the sea.
June the 8th, 793 AD.
A sizable force of Norse Vikings come from the sea.
So the sea's quite far away now, but we know it was much closer in the 8th century. So when the Vikings pulled up on the beach in their longship, they would have been much closer to the monastery. Really quite a quick, sprint up the beach to come and attack, so the monks would not have had much warning.
According to one of the chroniclers, they came in like fierce wolves. And they murdered the monks, and they carried others off in chains.
When word of this bloody assault got out, its impact was far-reaching.
It's the first attack on a Christian settlement. It's not the first attack by the Vikings in Britain, but it's really quite shocking. It shakes the church.
And it was on such a horrific scale that the news spread like wildfire across Western Europe.
Gravestones found at the grounds show that some believe this was divine vengeance.
Why did St. Cuthbert not intervene and prevent such barbaric slaughter and protect the monks? For many, this was a sign that doomsday was coming.
In fact, it was the start of the Viking Age. The monks fled, taking Cuthbert's remains with them. This wandering community of monks carried Cuthbert's coffin with them until it was enshrined at Durham Cathedral. Centuries later, when they felt it safe, they returned to the Holy Island.
12th century monks wanted Lindisfarne to be a place of pilgrimage, and they didn't have St. Cuthbert's body anymore. So they built an empty tomb where St. Cuthbert had been buried, and they succeeded in making that a place of pilgrimage.
It's believed stone from the original church was reused in the building of this later incarnation. And its layout reflects the strength of Cuthbert's cult in the Middle Ages.
The church that's built here seems to be mirrored or trying to copy Durham. And it becomes almost a second centre of the cult of Cuthbert.
Corner turrets, battlements, and cross-shaped arrow loops show the later fortification of the church. But they could only protect the monks for so long.
Lindisfarne continued as an active religious community until Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s, when he crushed the Catholic Church, shut down all the abbeys and monasteries, and murdered the monks.
In the 1820s, the central tower collapsed. But miraculously, not everything was destroyed.
Well, the tower's gone, but almost magically, one arch remains. It is as though God has made a promise that this kind of ruination won't come again.
Today, St. Cuthbert holds an important place in the story of early Christianity in Britain.
Cuthbert is somebody who turns Christianity from the religion of Britain's elites into the religion of Britain's people.
And more than 1,000 years later, the ruins on this windswept island still draw the faithful.
People still come, the pilgrims come in their thousands.
Lindisfarne is one of the earliest sites of Christian pilgrimage in Britain, and for many today remains a mecca of Christian history in Britain.
In a rural Polish village is a conspicuous building with a secret past.
It looks like something from afar, almost out of a fairy tale. It's incredibly ornate. It's got these beautiful windows.
If you look at this building from above, you can actually see that it's laid out like a cross. Is that a coincidence, or does it have a deeply symbolic religious meaning?
As you walk along these corridors and you peer into the doors, you realize It looks more like a school or an infirmary, a hospital.
But its original purpose was a far cry from what it became.
This place has a really twisted history. Its roots are grounded in charity and kindness, but the ultimate application of this place was positively diabolical.
These walls hide an incredibly dark history, one that is still shrouded in mystery to this day.
This is Mościce Palace. Built in the 1880s, it was designed as a hospital and sanatorium.
It was commissioned by the Order of the Knights of Malta, and this is a Catholic organization that is dedicated to providing humanitarian aid to those in need.
Little remains from those early days, although not everything is gone.
Deep in the basement, stowed far away from sight, there's an object that is sort of innocuous. This item offers a vital clue to what transpired at this site.
This baby carriage holds the truth of what this place really was.
The Order of the Knights of Malta kept working in this place, doing charitable work until about 1926. When funding ran dry, they couldn't afford to maintain the facility, so they sold it to a wealthy Jewish merchant from the area. But his control of this building would not last for long.
In an atmosphere of increasingly violent anti-Semitism, this Jewish merchant chose to pack up his belongings and flee. As local historian Jan Niewczas recalls, the merchant got out just in time.
Pałac przez nazistów został przejęty w roku 1938 jako dom czynszowy i funkcjonował do końca II wojny światowej, czyli do 1945.
What they used it for, however, was a mystery. But in 2010, a discovery was made in the cemetery across the road. It proved something that until then had only been a terrible rumor.
Odnaleźli mogiłę zbiorową, w której znaleziono około 40 ciał szkieletów męskich, żołnierzy armii niemieckiej, ale znaleziono także 3 kobiety w wieku około 20 do 30 lat, czyli młode kobiety, które zmarły po urodzeniu dziecka, na co wskazywał układ miednicy.
Interviews with the locals also added to this evidence. Residents recalled seeing German men and women in Nazi uniforms walking around as couples on the property. And others remembered children being born here, but not staying for long.
The evidence was mounting. Everything pointed towards the theory that this site was used by one of Hitler's top secret societies.
In the run-up to the war, Hitler had multiple concerns. He didn't just want to consolidate power, he also wanted to purify the German community.
This was all about having a pure Germanic Aryan race and producing more and more pure Aryans to occupy this expanding German Third Reich.
To achieve this, Hitler set about ridding society of those he deemed undesirable, while also increasing the birth rate.
In terms of filling that void, Hitler turned to the nation's women, the nation's Aryan women.
For starters, Hitler basically had incentives for German couples to have more kids. Cash incentives, medals for having lots of children. Mothers who had a bunch of kids would get a medal from the Fuhrer.
They brought together large groups of young men and young girls for human breeding.
The next step was the Lebensborn project, created in December 1935 by Hitler's right-hand man, Heinrich Himmler.
Był to program, który przewidywał, że stworzone zostaną ośrodki dla kobiet, które będą tutaj rodziły czystej rasy aryjskiej dzieci.
It's believed this building was one of those secret locations. And the women brought here were selected by a special medical committee.
Musiała być zdrowa, nie mogła przechodzić chorób zakaźnych, musiała być dobrej budowy, żeby być pewną, że będzie rodziła zdrowe dzieci.
But it wasn't just the women that had to pass tests.
Kobiety właściwie będących tutaj w ośrodku byli sprowadzani do frontu ci najbardziej zasłużeni wojskowi SS-mani, którzy wykazali się jakimś odwagą na frontach II wojny światowej. W ramach nagród urlopy dostawali urlopy do tych miejsc tutaj.
For women, their life here was of a high standard, but their every move was controlled.
Były kontrole tak samo jak wieczorem. Godzina 20 była kolacja. Wszyscy byli przy kolacji, a po kolacji rozchodziły się pary po pokojach w jednym określonym celu do współżycia seksualnego.
Once the children were born, they were kept here for as little as 2 weeks.
And after that, they would be sent out to German families, so they would be taken away from their birth mothers.
The SS was responsible for the adoption and education of the children that were bred through this program, and they were brought up with strict Nazi ideology.
Hitler believed that if you got children early on, we're talking before Hitler Youth, we're talking in the crib as infants, if you could get control of their hearts and minds then, that was important to Nazification, to the Nazi future.
But the Nazis didn't stop at breeding Aryan children. They went a step further.
The Lebensborn program was also involved in the kidnapping of foreign children.
The children who were kidnapped really fit a certain phenotypical mold in terms of hair color, eye color, skin color. It's about how people look and whether or not they can pass as Aryan.
It is estimated that some 400,000 children were kidnapped from across Europe and were placed in the custody of German families.
Dozens of similar structures across Europe were exploited for this Germanization program. Yet most of the evidence of what went on within these palace walls has long vanished. Until more discoveries are made, the details of what happened here will remain a mystery. While Mościce Palace is now abandoned, the Lebensborn project isn't just a distant memory. Many of the children it produced are still alive today.
Probably one of the most famous Lebensborn children was one of the female singers in ABBA, Frida Lindstad. Her mother was mated with a SS officer.
Frida is just one of thousands. And although some may know their past, many grew up unaware that they were the product of a horrifying eugenics experiment. In Israel, on the edge of the historic city of Jerusalem, lies a haunting ruin.
Where the Judean hills instantly turn into a bustling modern city, there's an odd collection of beautiful old stone houses clinging to a hillside.
Some of the pathways are almost obscured by vegetation, roofs have collapsed. It's not clear why this village is completely empty when the land around it is quite densely settled.
This village should be a desirable place to live.
You see a water source right in the middle of the village, something rare in this part of the world. It's a very arid environment.
Jerusalem is such a highly developed city because property there is so expensive. This place would be worth loads.
Dig deeper, and some aspects of these ruins don't make sense.
In the roofs that are still intact, there are these strange holes. Almost looks like someone did them intentionally.
Yakov Oder used to live in this village and fondly remembers the time he spent here.
Here I was born in this house. This is the beautiful life for me, to live between these walls with parents and relatives. We have everything, fruits, seeds, animals, milk. We were kings in our homes, in our village.
This is Lifta, a once idyllic village built around a very precious resource.
Now we are in the heart of Lifta. Here is the water spring, old people and youth meeting here, telling old stories.
There's actually only 2 year-round springs near Jerusalem, here in these 2 valleys. These are the places that you can grow fruits and vegetables. And this was actually known as the Garden of Jerusalem.
And it was this spring that brought the first settlers here more than 2,000 years ago. Avi Mashia of the Israel Antiquities Authority has carried out a detailed investigation of the village's past.
The first phase of the village that we can see is from the Roman period. You can see a big stone building, like a stone watchtower on the entrance of Jerusalem.
As the years went on, Lifta grew to become an important agricultural center for nearby Jerusalem.
You can see here the industrial passage. This is a long corridor of 500 meters with many oil press and dozens of service rooms and storage. You can see here a big stone that was the base of the oil press, and the huge stone was above with a donkey or other animal to turn it around.
Life in Lifta continued relatively unchanged as great empires rose and fell around it. But as the 20th century came into view, everything would change.
Nothing better for me than to come to Lifta. Nothing. But I have mixture feelings. From one side, I feel happy. But from other side, I feel so sad that I can't stay here.
After thousands of years of occupation, Lifta was caught in the crossfire of a modern conflict and was struck by a great tragedy. At the end of the First World War, Britain took control of this area, then known as Mandatory Palestine.
When the British assumed stewardship of the region after the First World War, they in effect promised to create an Arab and Jewish state that would be self-governing. But they were confronting a serious issue, which is that you did have a split population.
At the same time, there was a growing movement among Jews in Europe to leave Europe, where they often faced various kinds of persecution, and move to Israel and build a new homeland there. This was a source of some tension.
In the horrific aftermath of World War II, these tensions came to a head.
After the Holocaust, a lot of Jews want to move to the Palestine Mandate. They want to establish the Jewish state that they'd been promised by the British government way back in 1917. And the Arab population were energized by new ideas about Arab liberation, and Jewish nationalism and Arab nationalism clash.
In 1947, as a war-weary Britain prepared to leave the region, large-scale violence erupted, and Lifta was caught in the middle.
This little village of Lifta is right on the road between the mixed Arab and Jewish city of Jerusalem and the largely Jewish city of Tel Aviv on the coast. And once fighting started in earnest between the Jewish militias and the Arab militias, this was a war zone.
Yakov witnessed the violent conflict that escalated here.
My brother began to cry, to shout, "Mama, they are shooting, they are shooting, they are shooting." My mom took us inside the room, in the corner, under a table, to protect us.
As the fighting continued, getting ever more violent, Yakov and his family fled the village.
I remember one day my father came. I walked with my sisters behind him to the valley to avoid shooting, and we became refugees.
Like much of Israel's recent past, the story here is very complicated, and what actually happened depends upon which side you're talking to. So the Israeli history books say that the occupants of Lifta fled, whereas when you talk to Arabs, they say that they were intimidated into leaving because of the threat of violence.
By February 1948, Lifta was empty. Shortly after, Israel declared its independence and took control of this land. The occupants were never permitted to return.
You can see these holes in the roof. They were put there intentionally to make the buildings uninhabitable.
Today, Lifta faces an uncertain future.
After centuries of existence, this historic village faces a new threat. There are plans in the works to build luxurious accommodations, but it's not a done deal yet.
The Israeli Antiquities Bureau has also explored this area and documented how old some of these structures really are. And so now they're involved in helping make that decision. But it looks like there's a pretty strong movement against doing anything that would radically change this little historic piece of the past of this region.
And Yakov and the other former residents of Lifta haven't given up hope of one day returning.
We have a dream, the right to live free in our place. We will never forget our house or our village, while my heart, I'll never forget.